Okay, let's start with a simple idea, or maybe an uncomfortable one.
Yeah. What's that?
What if, your first instinct on a test, what if it's usually wrong?
Huh.
Okay. We always hear go with your gut, right? That changing your answer is just, well, second guessing.
Right. That hesitation means you're probably going from right to wrong.
But what if flipping that switch, changing that answer, is actually the smarter play?
It absolutely feels counterintuitive, doesn't it? We're kind of wired to trust that immediate flash.
We see doubt as weakness, maybe?
Exactly. But the research, well, it paints a different picture. It shows that actually revisiting that first thought, questioning it, often gets you closer to the right answer.
And that surprising idea is really the jumping off point for our deep dive today.
Yeah.
We're immersing ourselves in the thinking from Adam Grant's book, Think Again, The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know.
It's a fascinating book. It's basically all about why we find it so difficult to change our minds.
And why it's maybe more important than ever to do it.
Absolutely. In this world that's changing so fast. And crucially, how we can get better at it. Inside our own heads, but also when we talk to other people.
So our mission here is to really pull out the best bits, the most valuable nuggets from these ideas.
The surprising stats, the stories you don't expect.
Yeah, the practical stuff that shows us, how much power there is in just admitting we don't know everything. We've really tried to soak in this book to bring you the core insights.
So let's go back to that test answer thing. It directly tackles what Grant labels the first instinct fallacy.
Okay.
And there's actually, well, a lot of evidence here. One big review looked at studies covering over 1,500 students. And the finding, pretty overwhelming.
What did they find?
In every single study, the majority of times people changed their answers.
Yeah.
They went from wrong to right.
Wait, every single time? Not even one study showed the opposite?
Nope. Every single one pointed the same way. It really does kind of blow that stick with your gut advice out of the water.
Yeah.
Researchers even did this old school thing, counting eraser marks on actual exam papers in Illinois.
Seriously, eraser marks?
Yeah, and they found twice as many changes went from wrong to right compared to the other way around. And teachers see it all the time, right? The students willing to rethink, they tend to do better.
That is just fascinating data. So if the evidence is that clear, why are we so, stubborn about rethinking? Why do we feel that pull to stick with whatever we thought first?
That's where Grant brings in this psychological idea, seizing and freezing.
Seizing and freezing.
Yeah, we sort of seize onto an idea or belief that feels comfortable, and then we freeze. We shut our minds off to anything that contradicts it.
It's funny, isn't it? We're happy to update our phones, our kitchens, our clothes.
Totally. We want the latest gadget, the newest style.
But our knowledge, our opinions, those feel, sacred somehow.
We cling to them. Because conviction feels safe, right? Doubt feels shaky, vulnerable.
Yeah, there's definitely a comfort in feeling certain, even if maybe that certainty is built on outdated ideas.
Exactly. And our beliefs can get really brittle, like glass, resistant to any new information tapping on them.
And today, with things changing so incredibly fast, that brittleness, that refusal to rethink, it can have really serious consequences.
Oh, absolutely. We saw it play out globally, didn't we? Just recently with the pandemic.
Yeah.
Those initial assumptions about the virus, how bad it could get, how deadly it was, how it actually spread. Leaders in many places were, slow to rethink those early ideas.
And that delay, that sticking to old information when new data was pouring in.
It had a huge human cost.
Yeah.
Immense.
And on a personal level too, right? We were all suddenly forced to rethink things we never questioned.
Completely. Is it safe to go here or there? Can I hug someone? Can work actually happen remotely? Everything was suddenly up for grabs.
The book gives another really stark example, that Man Gulch wildfire.
Right, back in 1978. The policy then, based on thinking from decades earlier, was basically put out every single fire by 10 a.m. the next day, no matter what.
Even if it wasn't really threatening anyone.
Exactly. In Man Gulch, it was a remote area. Lives weren't immediately at risk. But the core assumption, all wildfires are bad, extinguish immediately, wasn't questioned enough inside the Forest Service culture.
So they sent in the smoke jumpers based on that rigid rule.
They did. And that failure to rethink the context, the sticking to the old rule, it led to tragedy, 13 lives lost.
That's just chilling. It really shows the cost of not rethinking. So this book and what we're talking about, it feels like an invitation, really.
An invitation? How so?
To just let go of knowledge and opinions that maybe don't fit anymore. To anchor our sense of who we are and being flexible, not just being consistent all the time?
Yes, it's like shedding the old maps that don't work and being willing to draw new ones.
Yeah.
Rethinking isn't just about fixing mistakes.
It's about agility.
Mental agility, yeah.
Yeah.
To generate new solutions, look at old problems with fresh eyes, without being stuck in those old assumptions. It's more than a skill. It's a whole shift in how we see information and even ourselves.
And a big part of that shift, Grant argues, is learning to think more like a scientist. What does that even mean in, everyday life? Or at work?
It basically means treating your own ideas, your beliefs, not as gospel truth, but as hypotheses.
Okay, so theories to be tested, not facts to be defended.
Precisely. He talks about this study with Italian startup founders. One group got trained in this scientific mindset. View your strategy as a theory. See customer interviews as developing hypotheses. Your minimum viable product. That's an experiment.
So you put on your mental lab coat.
You got it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just a theoretical exercise, these founders. They ended up doing significantly better financially.
Why? Just because they were testing things.
Because they were constantly testing, adapting, rethinking based on what the market was telling them.
Right.
They weren't, married to their first idea. They were committed to finding the best idea through that process of experimentation.
That makes a lot of sense. For a startup, they have to be agile. But what about people who are already experts in their field? Doesn't knowing a lot make you better at this?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But surprisingly, intelligence, deep expertise, they're not automatically a cure for failing to rethink.
No.
In fact, the book suggests sometimes it can even be a curse.
A curse? How can being an expert possibly be a bad thing?
Well, think about it. The smarter you are, the better you might be at arguing your case, at rationalizing, at building these really complex, logical defenses around your existing beliefs, even if they're wrong.
So you get really good at proving yourself right, even when you're not.
Exactly. You build these fortresses that are harder to break down. Grant uses the BlackBerry example.
Oh.
Mike Lazaridis, brilliant engineer, right? Genius at designing the actual device.
Yeah, they were everywhere for a while.
But his expertise in hardware, his conviction that the device was everything, it kind of blinded him. He wasn't willing to rethink the market.
How so?
Well, engineers apparently suggested putting their encrypted messaging, BBM, onto competitors' phones, basically creating WhatsApp before WhatsApp.
Wow.
But he shot it down, worried it would kill BlackBerry hardware sales.
And we know how that story ended. WhatsApp sold for billions. BlackBerry, not so much. So his own expertise got in the way.
It looks like it. There was this anonymous letter from a senior employee there in 2011, basically saying the company completely failed to rethink its core ideas, that they were years behind. Convictions, especially when they're tied to your identity or past successes, they can trap you.
So the answer isn't thinking slower, it's thinking faster. Or rethinking faster.
Or accelerated rethinking, yeah. Constantly questioning and updating, like Apple, right? They almost died, then came roaring back because they fundamentally rethought their approach.
Okay, so overconfidence, especially from expertise, can be a trap. But what about the other end? That feeling of being an imposter, like you're not really qualified? Surely that's always bad.
Well, Grant looks at the surprising upsides of what he calls imposter thoughts. Those moments where maybe your actual competence is higher than your confidence level.
Upsides to feeling like an imposter? That sounds crazy. It usually feels awful, paralyzing.
It definitely can feel that way. But look at this study of medical students, the ones who reported feeling like imposters. They didn't actually do worse on diagnostic tests.
Okay.
But here's the fascinating part. They had significantly better bedside manner.
Better? How?
They were more empathetic, more respectful. They asked better questions, shared information more clearly with patients.
So doubting their own abilities made them connect better with people.
It seems so. They weren't just relying on, I'm the expert here. Their internal doubt pushed them to work harder on the human connection side. And they found similar things with investment pros who felt like imposters. They got better performance reviews.
Why?
Because that slight insecurity maybe drove them to seek out more information, different perspectives. Like one psychologist said, learning requires the humility to realize one has something to learn.
So a little bit of self-doubt, that intellectual humility, it can actually fuel learning and teamwork. It stops you from just assuming you've got all the answers.
Precisely. Think about charge nurses. A study found that nurses who initially hesitated or doubted taking on that leadership role, they often turned out to be more effective leaders down the line.
Really? Why?
Because they were more likely to ask for second opinions from more experienced colleagues. Their feeling of maybe not having enough experience, their imposter thoughts, made them listen more, rely on the team more. They compensated through collaboration and rethinking their first instinct.
This sounds like it's leading to the idea of confident humility. Is that the goal? The sweet
Well, that
spot?
seems to be the most productive place to be, yeah. Confident humility. It means having faith in your abilities, right? Knowing your strengths, what you can do,
Okay.
while also having the humility to recognize you might not have the perfect solution right now. Or maybe you're not even tackling the right problem. Studies show the best leaders, they score high on both confidence and humility.
Faith in themselves, but aware of their limits.
Yes, that balance gives you enough doubt to pause, to re-examine things, but also enough confidence to actually go after new ideas, to push boundaries. You're not stuck in doubt, but you're not blinded by arrogance either. It's that sweet spot where you're open to being wrong and eager to figure things out.
Okay, so rethinking is vital for ourselves. But man, what about trying to open other people's minds? Especially when they're really dug in on something.
Yeah, that's the tough part, isn't it? The book has some really insightful stuff here. It starts with the idea that persuasion, it's not a battle, it's not a lecture, it's more like a dance, or maybe a negotiation.
Meaning if you push too hard.
Your partner resists, they push back, or just shut down. You can't just hammer someone with facts and expect them to change.
Telling them they're wrong definitely doesn't work.
Rarely. Grant talks about Harish Natarajan, this world champion debater. He was debating an 8-year-old prodigy, incredibly smart kid. And Harish didn't start by attacking her arguments. He started by finding common ground, acknowledging her valid points, even saying what he learned from her. He wasn't acting like a preacher with the one true answer or a prosecutor trying to pick holes.
He was positioning himself more like a partner in exploring the idea.
Exactly. Showing humility, showing curiosity, inviting her into a discussion, not a fight. Treating their ideas like, well, hypotheses to examine together. Grant contrasts that with how average negotiators operate versus the really skilled ones.
How do they differ?
Average ones get stuck in these defend-attack cycles.
Just lobbing arguments back and forth, going nowhere fast.
Right. Skilled negotiators, they do things differently. They ask way more questions. Like 1 out of every 5 things they say is a question.
Not just rhetorical questions, right? Genuine curiosity.
Genuine curiosity. Not just, why do you think that? But really trying to understand, like, so you don't see any merit at all in this other view. They also talk about the feelings involved, the process of the conversation itself.
So listening, asking questions, that's actually more persuasive than just talking at someone.
Often, yes.
Yeah.
Much more. Asking questions makes the other person think more deeply about their own reasons. It shows respect, it lowers their defenses, and it can create that space for them to find their own reasons to rethink, which sticks way better than being told you're wrong. You're kind of guiding them, not shoving them.
This sounds really, really hard, though, when beliefs are tangled up with who someone is, like rivalries or stereotypes.
Oh, absolutely. Identity makes it super tough. The book uses that intense, sometimes, let's face it, irrational rivalry between Red Sox and Yankees fans.
Yeah, that's a deep one.
Fans use the exact same negative words to describe the other side. The feelings run deep. And here's the kicker. Trying to downplay the rivalry or say something nice about the other team, it often backfires, makes fans more aggressive.
Because challenging the rivalry feels like you're attacking them personally.
Exactly. When your identity is wrapped up in that group belief, an attack on the belief feels like an attack on you. Remember that study where fans literally preferred abstract negative outcomes over supporting their rival team? It shows how powerful identity is.
Scary powerful. So how do you even begin to challenge those kinds of deep-seated group beliefs or stereotypes?
Well, Grant suggests approaches that try to sidestep direct confrontation. One way is pointing out how arbitrary some stereotypes are, like using zodiac signs for discrimination in some places, just highlighting how flimsy the foundation can be.
Making people see the absurdity of it.
Kind of, yeah. And then there's the amazing story of Daryl Davis,
The musician.
the black musician who has spent decades actively seeking out and talking to white supremacists, KKK members, leaders.
That takes incredible courage. How does he even start that conversation?
His approach wasn't to preach or argue. It was incredibly simple, direct, and disarming. He'd ask something like, how can you hate me when you don't even know me? He just engaged them in conversation, listened to their stories, their beliefs, without immediate judgment, built actual human connection.
So he wasn't trying to win an argument. He was trying to present a different reality, one that didn't fit their prejudice.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
He wasn't aiming for instant conversion. He was planting seeds of doubt, giving them a real human experience that contradicted their worldview and their group identity. He estimates he's helped hundreds leave the KKK.
Hundreds, just through talking and listening.
Yeah, not by force, not by shaming, but by creating the conditions where they could start their own rethinking journey. It's incredibly powerful.
It really highlights meeting people where they are, doesn't it? And facilitating their process, not forcing it.
And it ties into other examples, like vaccine whisperers working with hesitant parents. They don't lecture, they build trust first, they ask permission before sharing information, they listen, really listen to the fears without dismissing them, they empower the parents to make their own informed choice. Listening and avoiding coercion, it's key.
It really seems like opening minds is much more about dialogue, curiosity, and basic respect than just having the right facts loaded up. The book also brings this to big, complex issues, right? Like climate change.
Yes, and how our tendency towards binary bias can get in the way.
Binary bias, meaning seeing everything as just two sides.
Exactly. We simplify complex things into black and white. Believer versus non-believer. Us versus them. Al Gore, for instance, sometimes framed the climate discussion in ways that maybe unintentionally reinforced this divide, contrasting truth with so-called skeptics or deniers.
Which probably just makes the other side dig in harder.
Yeah, it definitely can, because reality is almost never that simple. That binary framing makes it harder for people who are uncertain, or maybe somewhere in the middle, to even engage. Plus, the media often gives disproportionate airtime to the loudest, most dismissive voices, making denial seem way more common than it actually is.
Which might make people feel like, well, why bother acting if so many people disagree?
Right. It can reduce the collective will to act.
So how does this rethinking approach suggest we handle that kind of complexity?
Basically, by embracing it, both when we take in information and when we share it. As listeners, we should look for sources that show different sides, that admit what's still uncertain.
And as communicators,
Admitting nuance, acknowledging contingencies, it doesn't make you look weak. It actually builds trust.
Yeah.
It reflects reality better. Instead of just saying diversity is good, you might say diversity brings huge benefits, but it also presents challenges we need to navigate.
Yeah.
You discuss both sides.
It feels more authentic, more credible that way. And the book warns about something called idea cults.
Yeah, that's a great term. It's when groups or even individuals grab onto one oversimplified idea. Maybe it's a diet trend, a business fad, a learning theory like learning styles, or even personality tests like Myers-Briggs. And they defend it fiercely. They resist any nuance, any evidence that it has limits, any contradictory findings. If you find yourself holding onto an idea so tightly that you insist it's always right or never has downsides, you might be leaning into an idea cult. Rethinking demands we see the shades of gray, that even great ideas have limits or contexts where they don't fit.
And instead of just trying to imagine what someone else is thinking, which apparently we're terrible at,
Oh, we're awful mind readers.
the book says we should actually ask them, seek out their perspective.
Crucial point.
Yeah.
When we just imagine someone else's view, we usually just project our own biases onto them. It just confirms what we already thought they thought.
Right, confirmation bias about their thoughts.
Exactly. The only way to really know is to talk to them. Ask open-ended questions, listen. Get the actual data, the nuances, directly from the source. It's that scientist mindset again, but applied to relationships. Test your hypothesis about their views by actually asking them.
This whole rethinking framework, it feels like it goes way beyond just facts and arguments. It applies to our lives, our careers too. The book even questions that classic question we ask kids, what do you want to be when you grow up?
It does. Because that question, well-intentioned as it is, can kind of push kids towards identity foreclosure.
Meaning?
Settling too early on a fixed idea of who they are and what they'll do. You decide, I am a doctor or I am an artist. And that identity becomes rigid.
And then, if things aren't working out, if you're not happy on that path?
You get caught in escalation of commitment. You just keep pouring time, energy, maybe money into it, not because it makes sense anymore, but because you're locked into that identity. You have to justify the past choices.
Like digging yourself deeper into a hole.
Pretty much. Grant tells the story of Ryan Grant, who went through this incredibly long, tough neurosurgery residency. He wasn't happy, but he kept going. His persistence, his grit, which we usually admire.
Yeah, grit is supposed to be good.
It became, in his words, foolish stubbornness, because it was tied to this fixed identity on a path that wasn't right for him anymore.
So grit can actually be bad if you're gritting your teeth down the wrong road.
Exactly. If grit means sticking to a plan when it's clearly failing or the goal itself needs rethinking, it can hold you back. Super gritty people might even take bigger risks because they're so locked onto that one outcome, even if they should be questioning the outcome itself.
So maybe we should be asking kids, what do you want to do instead of what do you want to be?
That little change in wording can be really powerful, yeah. Thinking about careers and life as actions, doing science, making art, solving problems rather than fixed identities, being a scientist, being an artist, it keeps things more open.
It encourages exploration.
Right. And makes people more open to shifts and changes as they learn and grow and as the world changes. Studies show kids stay more interested in science when it's talked about as something you do.
It gives you permission to change course, to pivot without feeling like a failure.
Absolutely. And this applies just as much to relationships. Good, long-lasting relationships need constant rethinking.
How so?
Well, there's a story about a student who nearly broke up with his girlfriend. She was great, the relationship was fulfilling, but she didn't quite fit his pre-big checklist of the ideal life identity he had in his head.
He had a fixed picture.
A very fixed picture. But he managed to rethink those rigid expectations. He allowed her and himself and the relationship room to evolve. And it thrived. You have to be open to who your partner might become and who you might become together. Not just checking boxes.
It's about growth, not just finding a perfect match from day one.
Exactly. And finally, rethinking even helps us understand our search for happiness. There's this weird paradox the book touches on.
What's that?
The more people explicitly say they value happiness, the less happy they often end up being.
Huh. That seems backwards, like chasing something makes it run away. Why?
Well, there are a few ideas. Maybe people get too caught up in judging how happy they are, moment to moment, instead of just living. Or maybe they chase those intense peak highs, massive joy, instead of valuing the smaller, more frequent good feelings of everyday life.
Or maybe they focus too much on pleasure instead of purpose.
That's another strong possibility. Prioritizing pleasure over meaning.
So aiming directly for happiness might actually be the wrong strategy.
It might be less effective than finding meaning. A meaning often comes from contributing to something beyond yourself. The book gives this really powerful example of hospital custodians.
The cleaning staff.
Yeah. Some of them started rethinking their jobs. They stopped seeing themselves as just cleaning floors. They reframed their work as actively caring for the patient's well-being.
Yeah.
By talking to patients, cheering them up, doing little things to make their stay better. They found deep meaning in actions that went way beyond their official job description. They rethought their contribution.
They essentially rewrote their own job identity, not by getting a new job, but by changing how they approached their current one.
Precisely. It just shows our identities aren't set in stone. They're open. Rethinking what you do every day, how you interact, can open up surprising avenues for purpose and fulfillment, often by finding ways to help or connect with others. We don't have to be stuck with old ideas of who we are or where we should be going.
It really does all tie together, doesn't it? Rethinking, even though it can feel uncomfortable, admitting uncertainty, maybe admitting we were wrong, it really emerges as this vital skill.
Yeah, essential for navigating this complicated world, for making our relationships better, for finding real fulfillment, even just for understanding ourselves more deeply.
It takes that humility to question, the doubt to reevaluate, and definitely the curiosity to explore what else might be true or possible.
And building that ability, that mental muscle, can be incredibly liberating. It leads to a richer life, a more adaptable one.
So for you listening right now, what does all this mean? If getting better at rethinking is a skill, one linked to success, purpose, well-being, what's maybe one small step you could take this week? Put on those mental scientist goggles. Just for a moment. Question something you've always taken for granted.
Could be an opinion you held forever, a decision you've stuck with, maybe a pattern in a relationship, or even just a daily habit you do on autopilot.
What might you discover if you just allowed yourself that little bit of doubt, that spark of curiosity?
It's a powerful question to ponder. And of course, these core insights we've been digging into, they come from Adam Grant's fantastic book, Think Again, The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know. We've really just scratched the surface here.
Absolutely. There's so much more depth and many more examples in the book itself if these ideas spark something for you. You can find more details about it in the description below.
Thank you for listening to this deep dive.
See you next time.